currently Earth. It was May 11th in the year 1858 that Minnesota enters the Union. Known as the land of 10,000 lakes, Minnesota is the northern terminus of the Mississippi River's traffic and the westernmost point of the inland waterway that extends to the Great Lakes of the St. Lawrence Seaway to the Atlantic Ocean. The Ojibwe and the Dakota were among the native people who first made this land their home, and white settlement of the area began in 1820 with the establishment of Fort Snelling. In 1849, Minnesota became a U.S. territory. The building of railroads and canals brought a land boom during the 1850s, and Minnesota's population swelled from only 6,000 in 1850 to more than 150,000 by 1857. Chiefly a land of small farmers, Minnesota supported the Union in the Civil War and supplied large quantities of wheat to the Northern armies. Originally settled by the migrants of British, German, and Irish extraction, Minnesota saw a major influx of Scandinavian immigrants during the 19th century. Minnesota's twin cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, grew out of Fort Snelling, the center of early U.S. settlement. It was May 11th in the year 1919, during the second week of May 1919, that the recently arrived German delegation to the Versailles Peace Conference convened in Paris after the end of the First World War. After poring over their copies of the Treaty of Versailles, drawn up in the months preceding by the representatives of the victorious enemies, the German protesters prepared to lodge their objections of what they considered to be unfairly harsh treatment. Presented with the treaty on May 7th, 1919, the German delegation was given 2 weeks to examine the terms and submit their official comments in writing. The Germans, who put their great faith in the U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, who was our nation's 28th president, notion of a so-called peace without victory, and had pointed to his famous 14 points as the basis upon which they sought peace in November of 1918, were greatly angered and disillusioned by the treaty. As Ulrich von Brockdorff Rantzau, Germany's foreign minister, put it, this fat volume was quite unnecessary. They could have expressed the whole thing more simply in one clause. Germany renounces its existence. Driven by French and British desires to make Germany pay for the role it had played in the most devastating conflict the world had yet seen, Wilson and other Allied representatives at the peace conference had indeed moved away from a pure peace without victory. Germany was to lose 13% of its territory and 10% of its population. It was denied initial membership in the League of Nations, the international peacekeeping organization established by the treaty. The treaty also required Germany to pay reparations, though the actual amount ended up being less than what France had paid after the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. The real German objection to the Treaty of Versailles, however, was to the infamous Article 231, which forced Germany to accept sole blame for the war in order to justify the reparations. Despite much debate among the Allies themselves and over strenuous German protests, including the Brockdorff Rantzau, who wrote to the Allies on May 13th that the German people did not will the war and would never have undertaken a war of aggression, Article 231 remained in the treaty. The Germans were given a deadline of June 16th to accept their terms. This was later extended to June 23rd. Pressured by the Allies and thrown into confusion by a crisis within the Weimar government at home, the Germans gave in and accepted the terms at 5:40 p.m. on May 23rd. The Versailles Treaty was signed on June 28th in 1919. Meanwhile, opposition to the treaty and its Article 231, seen as a symbol of the injustice and harshness of the whole document, festered within Germany. As the years passed, full-blown hatred slowly settled into a smoldering resentment of the treaty and its authors, a resentment that would 2 decades later be counted to an arguable extent among the causes of the Second World War. It was May 11th in the year 1981 that reggae star Bob Marley continues his eternity at the age of 36. In what would prove to be the next to last concert of his tragically short life on this planet, Bob Marley shared the bill at Madison Square Garden with the hugely popular American band The Commodores. With no costumes nor choreography and no set design to speak of, the reggae star had the majority of his listeners on their feet and in the palm of his hands, according to the New York Times critic Robert Palmer. Quote, "After this show of strength and Mr. Marley's intense singing and electric stage presence, the Commodores were a letdown," unquote. Only days after his triumphant show in New York City, Bob Marley collapsed while jogging in Central Park and later received a grim diagnosis. A cancerous growth on an old soccer injury on his big toe had metastasized and spread to Marley's brain, liver, and lungs. Less than 8 months later, on May 11th in 1981, Bob Marley, the soul and international face of reggae music, continued his eternity in Miami, Florida. He was 36 years old. Nesta Robert Marley was born on February 6th in 1945 in rural St. Anne Parish, Jamaica, the son of a middle-aged white Jamaican Marine officer and an 18-year-old black Jamaican girl. At the age of 9, Marley moved to Trenchtown, a tough West Kingston ghetto where he would meet and befriend Neville Bunny Livingston, later Bunny Wailer, and Pete McIntosh, later Peter Tosh, and drop out of school at the age of 14 to make music. Jamaica at the time was entering a period of incredible music creativity. As transistor radios became available on an island then served only by a staid BBC-style national radio station, the music of America suddenly became accessible via stateside radio stations. From a mix of New Orleans-style rhythm and blues and indigenous African-influenced musical traditions arose first ska, then rocksteady, precursors to reggae, which did not take shape as a recognizable style of its own until the late 1960s. Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Wailer performed together as the Wailers throughout this period, coming into their own as a group just as reggae became the dominant sound of Jamaica. Thanks to the international reach of Island Records, the Wailers came to the world's attention in the early 1970s via their albums Catch a Fire in 1972 and Burnin' in 1973. Eric Clapton spread the group's name even wider by recording a pop-friendly version of I Shot the Sheriff from the latter album. With the departure of Tosh and Wailer in 1974, Marley took center stage in the group, and by the late 1970s, he had turned out a string of albums. Exodus in 1977 featuring Jamin, Waiting in Vain, and One Love, People Get Ready. Kaya in 1978 featuring Is This Love, and Sun is Shining, and Uprising in 1980 featuring Could You Be Loved and Redemption Song. While none of the aforementioned songs was anything approaching a hit in the U.S. during Bob Marley's lifetime, they constitute a legacy that has only increased his fame in the years since his continuance of eternity on this day in 1981. The historic information divulged on this audio file can be verified on history.com.